You know that feeling when life throws you a curveball, and instead of crumbling, you don't just survive, you actually come out stronger, maybe even like better than before.
Yeah, it's a familiar feeling for sure.
What if there was a word for that exact phenomenon? And maybe even a way to actively seek it out in your own life, maybe in the world around you.
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. It's a concept that promises to flip our usual understanding of stability and risk, like completely on its head.
It sounds significant. So, what are we talking about?
We're talking about this idea that suggests certain things don't just resist shocks or, bounce back. They actually benefit from them.
Benefit. So it's not just resilience, like getting back to
That's
normal.
exactly. It goes way beyond resilience, which is just returning to how you were. And it's more than robustness, which is just like withstanding stress without changing much.
Okay.
This concept pushes us to think about how some things actually thrive on volatility, on randomness, on stress.
Okay. I'm intrigued. The concept we're exploring today is called antifragility. And our guide for this deep dive is this really remarkable collection of insights from a thinker who's spent decades exploring randomness, uncertainty, basically how we make decisions in a world we frankly don't fully get.
Yeah, and our mission today is to unpack these sources. We want to really get under the hood of what anti-fragility is, where we can find it sometimes in really unexpected places, and crucially, how grasping this idea can radically change how you view almost everything.
Everything. Like what?
Well, your personal health, for starters, your career choices,
Yep.
but also the big picture stuff, economic systems, political structures. It really reframes so much.
Wow. Okay. So expect some aha moments then.
I think so. It really does help make sense of an unpredictable world in a new way.
All right, let's unpack this anti-fragility. When we think about something that isn't fragile,
Yeah,
what comes to mind? Usually words like robust, maybe resilient.
right. Sturdy,
Yeah.
tough, able to take a hit.
Exactly. Something that stays the same after a shock. Or maybe it bends but springs back,
Mm.
right? Back to how it was.
Yep, that's the standard thinking.
But that's not quite what we're digging into here, is it? It feels like.
Yeah,
Like we're missing a word for the real opposite of fragile.
precisely. Robust and resilient, they imply resistance or recovery, returning to the original state. Anti-fragility, though, it's a leap beyond that.
How so?
It means actively gaining from volatility, from randomness, disorder, stressors. An anti-fragile thing doesn't just shrug off damage, it gets better because of the disruption.
Okay, gets better. Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about sending a package. If it's delicate, you mark it fragile, right? Handle with care.
Of course.
But what's the true opposite of that? It's not just a robust box that won't break easily. Imagine a package you could stamp with, like, please mishandle or handle carelessly. The contents wouldn't just survive being dropped or thrown around, they'd somehow benefit from it. The fragile thing is harmed. The robust thing is, at best, unharmed. But the anti-fragile thing, it's unharmed at worst, and often it actually improves.
Wow. Please mishandle. I love that analogy. It really clicks. And this isn't just some abstract theory you're saying.
Not at all. The sources argue this property is, like, fundamental. It's behind almost everything that has evolved or improved over time.
Like what kind of things?
Well, biological evolution itself, obviously, the way cultures develop and adapt, how ideas spread and get refined, why some companies survive and others don't. Even perfecting a good recipe, like your grandma's chicken soup that got tweaked over generations based on feedback.
Okay, so it's everywhere.
Pretty much. It defines the boundary, in a way, between what's living and organic, like the human body, which we'll definitely talk more about, and what's inert, mechanical, like the stapler on your desk.
Right. My stapler doesn't get better if I drop it.
Exactly. You drop it, it might be fine, that's robust. Drop it too much, it breaks. Fragile, it doesn't learn. But your body, your muscles, when you lift weights,
I get stronger.
right, they don't just endure the stress, they pair slightly and then rebuild themselves stronger. That's overcompensation. That's
Yeah.
anti-fragility. Or your immune system fighting off a cold, it learns. It gets better at fighting similar things next time.
Hmm. So we've been using this principle without really naming it.
Absolutely, especially in practical stuff, trial and error, natural systems. But we tend to reject it in our intellectual life, particularly in all this modern top-down planning. It's kind of ironic. Once you start looking, you see it everywhere.
Okay, so if it's everywhere, how do we spot it? Is there like a simple test or something?
There is, actually, and it's pretty elegant. It boils down to asymmetry.
Asymmetry, meaning,
Meaning, does it have more upside than downside from random events or shocks? Yes, it's antifragile. If it has more downside than upside, it's fragile.
More upside than downside. Okay.
So if the potential benefits from variation, randomness, even small errors outweigh the potential costs, then that system or person or whatever is antifragile. It's not about predicting the event, you see. It's about understanding the payoff structure if the event happens.
Right, so a fragile coffee cup, a small shock dropping it, has a huge downside relative to any possible upside, which is probably zero.
Exactly. But think about, say, a startup company. It might only have a small amount of investment capital to lose. That's the downside, and it's capped. But if it hits big, the upside is potentially massive, almost unlimited. That's an anti-fragile structure.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts the focus away from trying to predict everything, which we know is often impossible,
Right.
towards understanding how things react to the unpredictable, which leads to this really critical, almost paradoxical point you mentioned earlier. If these complex systems need volatility to thrive,
Yeah,
then trying to remove all the volatility, all the stressors, actually harms them.
this is huge and often completely missed. It's one of the most sobering insights from the sources, I think. Depriving systems of stressors weakens them, kills them, or makes them blow up later.
Like how?
Well, the simplest example, spend a month lying in bed. Even with perfect food, total comfort, what happens?
You get weak, muscle atrophy.
Right, your muscles waste away, your bones get weaker, you literally deteriorate from the absence of normal stressors like gravity, movement.
Oh.
And it's the same logic with bigger systems. Our attempts to overstabilize economies or political systems, trying to iron out all the bumps, prevent every little fluctuation.
We think that's making things safer.
But it often leads to extreme fragility. The risks don't vanish, they just hide. They accumulate under the surface, unseen, until they explode in much bigger, more catastrophic ways.
Like the financial crisis.
That's a classic example we'll get into. Or think of a forest. If you constantly suppress all the small natural brush fires, what happens?
The fuel builds up, dead wood, leaves.
Exactly, loads of undergrowth. So when a fire eventually does start, and it inevitably will, it's way, way more devastating than the small ones would have been.
So trying to prevent small problems creates a massive one later.
That's the core idea. And this, the author argues, is kind of the tragedy of modernity. We act like overprotective parents. Our attempts to help, to control everything, often end up hurting the systems we're trying to protect. These top-down policies, they just insult the natural anti-fragility of complex systems. We're inadvertently making our health, our economies, our societies more fragile by suppressing randomness, mistaking total stillness for stability.
Wow. Yeah, it feels like we're constantly striving for this smooth, predictable world, but maybe that very smoothness makes everything more brittle, more likely to shatter when something unexpected does happen.
That's a great way to put it. And with this understanding, we can start using this framework the sources propose, classifying things into 3 buckets: fragile, robust, or anti-fragile.
Okay, the triad.
Yeah. The fragile wants peace and quiet, tranquility. The anti-fragile actually likes a bit of chaos. It thrives on disorder. And the robust doesn't really care that much either way, within limits.
So this framework helps us see how different things handle volatility.
Exactly. It's a lens. Fragile things have more downside than upside from shocks. Their performance curve bends downwards with more randomness. Concave is the technical term.
Like my coffee cup.
Right. Anti-fragile things have more upside than downside. Their curve bends upwards with randomness. Convex. They gain from variation. And robust is basically linear, doesn't change much.
Okay, let's make this concrete. The sources use a great example: professions and income. These 2 twin brothers, John and George.
Yes, the bank clerk and the taxi driver. John, the bank clerk, has this super smooth, steady income. Predictable, looks great on paper, right?
Seems ideal, yeah. Easy to budget.
But it's actually deeply fragile. He's totally vulnerable to a big sudden shock. Like, his specific skills become obsolete due to automation or the bank merges or there's a huge financial crisis. Suddenly, especially if he's, say, in his 50s, his income could just vanish? Poof. And finding a similar steady job might be really hard.
Okay, so the stability is an illusion of safety. What about George, the taxi driver?
George's income is all over the place day to day. Some days are busy, some are dead slow. Lots of variability.
Which sounds stressful, maybe less safe.
You'd think so, but that daily randomness actually makes his income stream more robust, maybe even anti-fragile in the long run.
How?
Because those small, constant shocks, a slow week, road construction messing up his route, a sudden convention bringing loads of fares, they're giving him immediate feedback. Information.
Ah, okay, so he's constantly learning.
Exactly. He has to adapt all the time. Find new routes, learn which times are busy where, maybe offer better service, figure out how to handle surge pricing. This constant small-scale testing prevents big hidden vulnerabilities from building up. He's always tinkering, always adjusting. His income fluctuates, sure, but it's much less likely to go to zero overnight compared to John the banker.
Now it's powerful. So the visible instability of the taxi driver's income actually hides a deeper, long-term safety compared to the seemingly stable banker.
Precisely. The small stressors force adaptation and build resilience. And we see this same dynamic play out in political systems, too. Think about Switzerland. It's famous for stability, right?
Yeah, very stable. You assume it must have a really strong, efficient central government.
But the source argues the opposite. Switzerland's stability doesn't come from a big top-down government. It comes from the bottom up, from its system of cantons, municipalities, and all the local noise.
Noise, like local arguments.
Yeah, exactly. Petty squabbles over, where to put a new fountain, endless debates about local school rules, these seemingly boring local referendums, all that local churn, that volatility.
That sounds inefficient.
Maybe. But it prevents grand, risky, utopian ideas from ever taking hold at the national level, and it acts as a shock absorber.
Yeah.
Because decisions are so localized, any mistake stays small, contained. There's no single massive central policy that can fail catastrophically and bring the whole country down.
So it's like distributed error correction.
Perfectly put. The author calls it a dictatorship from the bottom. Citizens are deeply involved in small decisions, which paradoxically leads to this, yes, maybe boring, but incredibly resilient long-term stability. It allows for constant small adjustments, preventing the buildup of the kind of fragility you see in highly centralized states where one big mistake can be fatal.
That's fascinating, and it totally flips the script on what strong government means. It also makes me think of that other example from the sources, the merchant from Aleppo, who said he preferred war to prison.
Yeah, and he didn't mean literal prison.
Right? He meant the loss of freedom, political and economic, under a supposedly stable but autocratic top-down regime. He saw that kind of stability as worse than the risks of conflict.
It's a stark point, but it connects to this idea that maybe small, recurrent disruptions, wars, in a metaphorical sense, maybe can actually prevent the buildup of really explosive pressure in a system.
Well, so.
Well, look at the comparison made between Lebanon and Syria, based on the source's perspective. Lebanon went through a horrific civil war, years of chaos. Syria, under the Assads, had decades of top-down, centralized, modernizing stability. Yet today, according to the source, Lebanon has a higher standard of living, more dynamism, more entrepreneurship.
So the argument isn't that war is good.
Absolutely not. But it suggests that suppressing all volatility, all local dissent, all economic trial and error, all the political noise might create a brittle peace that leads to a far worse, more catastrophic collapse eventually. The small fires get put out, allowing fuel for a massive inferno to accumulate.
That makes sense. It's like the forest fire analogy again.
Exactly, and you see this pattern historically too. The Roman and Ottoman empires, despite being huge, often relied on local elites, city-states, allowing a degree of commercial autonomy, different local customs. This decentralization, maybe unintentionally, made them more resilient to systemic collapse compared to later, highly centralized nation-states trying to impose uniformity everywhere.
So these small, frequent fires, errors, disruptions, local arguments, they release pressure and force adaptation. And this applies to the nature of errors themselves, right? In fragile systems, errors are
Rare, hopefully, but when they happen, they're big and often irreversible. Think of a single point of failure in a huge centralized system like that power grid example. One failure cascades and takes down everything.
okay. And in an anti-fragile system,
Errors are different. They're numerous, small, usually benign, easily reversible, and crucially, they are packed with information. They're learning opportunities.
like learning to walk.
Perfect example. A toddler learning to walk falls constantly. Each fall is a tiny error, minimal harm, quick recovery. But each one provides critical feedback about balance, gravity, coordination.
Right. If you somehow prevented the child from ever falling,
They'd never learned to walk properly. And any fall they eventually did have would be much more dangerous because they wouldn't have built up any robustness or skill through those small failures.
so the advice is,
The source says, essentially, if you want to become anti-fragile, put yourself in situations where you love mistakes by making sure they are numerous and small in harm. It's the heart of tinkering, agile development. The scientific method: fail fast, learn quick, keep the potential losses small, but leave the upside open. These little errors act like vaccines, inoculating the system against the big, devastating ones.
That's a really profound way to think about errors. Not just unavoidable nuisances, but actually vital feedback. Which leads us perfectly into this other really important concept, one that's often overlooked: iatrogenics.
Ah, yes, iatrogenics. Harm done by the healer.
Exactly. Harm caused by intervention, especially when it's well-intentioned. Let's fix this kind of intervention. But it ends up being misguided. It seems like a major, often hidden problem in our modern world.
It really is. And a key part of it is that we often over-intervene based on noise, random fluctuations rather than actual signal, meaningful information.
Like checking your stocks every hour.
That's a good analogy. Most of those little up and down ticks are just random noise, not a deep signal about the company's future. If you buy and sell based on every wiggle, you'll probably just churn your account and lose money.
Right.
Similarly, in medicine or even just daily life, we often mistake natural, healthy variations in complex systems like our bodies or the economy as problems that need immediate fixing. It's this intellectual ticker where we think stability means absolute flatness, no variation allowed.
And the source suggests we tend to intervene too much in minor things, but maybe not enough in real emergencies.
That's a key point. We overtreat common colds or minor anxieties that would resolve on their own, potentially causing side effects. But sometimes we under-intervene in situations where decisive action is critical. And this whole problem of iatrogenics gets worse because outside of medicine, where it's at least formally recognized, we often don't even have a name for it in other domains, like economics or policy, even though it's just as pervasive.
And it's definitely not just a medical issue. The sources point to massive economic examples. Ellen Greenspan, former Fed chair.
Right, the self-proclaimed libertarian who, paradoxically, presided over policies that created huge fragility.
How so?
By trying to iron out the natural boom-bust cycle, constantly lowering interest rates, trying to prevent even minor recessions, essentially smoothing out all the volatility.
Which sounds good, right? No recessions.
Sounds great. But it prevented the system from naturally purging excesses and misallocated resources. Those risks, bad loans, complex derivatives nobody understood, hidden leverage, they didn't disappear, they just festered under the surface, accumulating until 2007-2008 when the whole thing blew up spectacularly. It's a classic case of economic iatrogenics. Suppressing small natural volatility led to a massive, catastrophic failure.
And part of the problem is the incentive structure, isn't it? It's easier to get credit for doing something.
Absolutely. The allure of, look what I did for you, is incredibly powerful. A surgeon gets rewarded for performing complex surgery. A fund manager gets bonuses for short-term performance. It's much harder to get rewarded for preventing a disaster that never happened or for letting nature heal something on its own, which often involves, well, doing nothing.
So the system encourages intervention, even when it might be harmful.
Yes. Managers get bonuses for visible actions and positive metrics, not for building hidden redundancies or avoiding losses that might occur after they've moved on. It creates a bias towards action, towards intervention that can actively increase fragility.
And the medical field has even more stark examples you mentioned.
Oh, definitely. Think about the trend of medicating kids for conditions like ADHD or depression. The source questions whether these are always inherent problems or sometimes just a result of modern life lacking the natural stressors and outlets kids need. Maybe more physical activity, less structured time, could solve it better than drugs with potential long-term side effects we don't fully understand.
Right, or the mammogram example, that was striking.
Yeah, the data suggests that annual mammograms for women over 40, while maybe reducing breast cancer deaths slightly, don't actually increase overall life expectancy.
Why not?
Because, the argument goes, they lead to overdiagnosis and overtreatment. Finding tumors that would never have become lethal, or even reacting to false positives, leads to anxiety, unnecessary surgeries, chemo, radiation, and deaths from those interventions can offset or even outweigh the benefits for the population as a whole. It's a profound iatrogenic effect from a well-meaning screening program.
It's chilling. It suggests that more information, more technology isn't always better. It can actually lead to more harm if we don't understand the system's response.
Exactly. And it's often a product of partial knowledge. This belief that doing something is always better than watchful waiting, combined with societal pressure.
The blood pressure thought experiment really drove this home for me. Can you recap that?
Sure. Imagine half the healthy population will, just by random chance, have a blood pressure reading above the normal threshold on any given day. It's just natural fluctuation, noise.
Okay.
Now, if doctors automatically prescribe medication every time they see a single high reading,
Then half the healthy population ends up on drugs they don't need.
precisely, and those drugs have side effects, plus the stress of being labeled sick. For someone who is actually healthy, the net effect could easily be a reduction in their life expectancy. It's intervention based purely on noise causing harm, an average person made worse by an average doctor's routine actions.
And this isn't just individual health, it's political systems too, like superpowers failing to predict revolutions.
Yeah, they blame intelligence failures for missing things like the Arab Spring in Egypt, but the source argues that's missing the point. These aren't primarily prediction failures. They're symptoms of systems made brittle by suppressing risk and dissent for too long. The interventions meant to create stability actually increase fragility.
Like U.S. support for the Shah of Iran.
That's the classic example used. Decades of supporting a repressive monarch created this veneer of stability. It prevented smaller, more natural political enforcements and dissent.
So the pressure just built up.
Exactly, until it exploded in a much bigger, more catastrophic way. The Iranian Revolution and the rise of the theocracy. A massive, unintended consequence, iatrogenics on a geopolitical scale. The act of stabilizing led to profound long-term instability.
So this constant drive to control, predict, and intervene often backfires spectacularly,
Correct.
which leads to this counterintuitive idea, the power of procrastination. Sometimes doing nothing is the best strategy.
Yes, inverse iatrogenics, you could call it. When the situation isn't immediately life-threatening, holding back, not intervening, can be the smartest, most anti-fragile move. It allows natural processes to unfold, for systems to self-correct, for the true signal to emerge from the noise. Nature, the source reminds us, is often less error-prone than our interventions.
Like Fabius Maximus, the Roman general, the procrastinator.
Cunctator, brilliant example. Facing Hannibal, arguably one of the greatest military minds ever, Fabius refused to engage in a decisive battle. He just harassed Hannibal's supply lines, shadowed his army, delayed.
Which must have driven Hannibal crazy.
Totally, but it worked. It bought Rome time to recover, rebuild its forces, and ultimately wear Hannibal down. Fabius won by not fighting directly, by strategic non-intervention. So procrastination, not about laziness, but about strategic delay in non-critical situations, can be a powerful tool. It lets things breathe, lets complexity resolve itself sometimes.
Okay, this connects directly to the whole issue of prediction, doesn't it? We seem obsessed with forecasting the future.
We are, and it's a massive problem.
Because, as you said, we can put a person on the moon, predict eclipses centuries out.
Right, incredible precision in certain physical domains.
Yet governments, corporations, economic experts, they seem utterly incapable of reliably forecasting the big things that really matter in human systems. Revolutions, financial crises, even next year's budget deficit half the time. It's a huge disconnect.
It really is stark when you look at it. The source tells that story about Mr. Cato, the big shot executive from an international finance body, confidently presenting economic forecasts stretching years into the future.
Right, and the author asks him
In front of this huge audience, basically. That's great. But what did you forecast for 2008 and 2009 before they happened? And the answer, of course, is silence, because nobody saw it coming. The track record for predicting these major rare events isn't just bad. The source says it is zero.
Zero. Wow. And it's not just because people aren't smart enough.
No, it's deeper than that. It's inherent in the nature of these complex, nonlinear systems. Too many feedback loops, too much randomness, human behavior. You just can't model them accurately enough for reliable long-term prediction. It's not a solvable problem with current methods.
So these forecasts aren't just useless, they can actually be harmful. That's the iatrogenics of forecasting.
Exactly. Providing these random numerical forecasts, even if people intellectually know they're unreliable, actually encourages more risk-taking. It gives a false sense of security, a false sense of control, like snake oil. People act on it as if it's real, leading to worse decisions and greater fragility.
And we don't forecast or hubris-proof our systems.
No. We child-proof homes because we know kids are vulnerable. But we build entire economic and political strategies around forecasts we know are terrible. It's hubris, this belief we can predict the unpredictable, and it makes us build brittle systems optimized for a future that never arrives.
So the solution isn't better forecasting models.
Yeah.
Trying to predict the next Black Swan event.
No, that's chasing ghosts. The solution the author argues forcefully, is to shift the whole conversation. Move it away from prediction and towards understanding fragility and anti-fragility.
Ah, okay. So focus on the response to shocks, not predicting the shocks themselves.
Precisely. Robust and anti-fragile systems don't need accurate predictions of the future. Think about redundancy. Having extra cash reserves or multiple suppliers or diverse skills. That's a non-predictive strategy.
How so?
Because you don't need to know which specific disaster will hit. You're just prepared for something unexpected to happen. Extra cash buffers you against job loss or medical emergency or market crash. It buys you resilience without needing foresight. It lets you navigate a world you don't fully understand because you're built to withstand or even benefit from its inherent unpredictability.
So it's about managing your exposure to uncertainty rather than trying to eliminate uncertainty through prediction.
That's the core shift. Build systems personal, financial, societal that can absorb shocks, adapt, maybe even gain from them, instead of betting everything on forecasts that are almost guaranteed to be wrong when it matters most.
This brings us to another really key concept, nonlinearity. You mentioned it before. Our world isn't linear, where double the input means double the output.
Right. More is not more is a good shorthand. In complex systems, the response is usually a curve, not a straight line. Double the dose of a drug, you might get 10 times the effect, or maybe less effect, or just side effects. Add double the cars to a highway, you don't just get double the traffic time, you might get gridlock.
So simple cause and effect breaks down. You can't just add things up.
Exactly. It's hard to understand the whole just by looking at the parts in isolation. And the source simplifies this into two shapes, concave and convex.
The frown and the smile.
Yeah. Concave is the frown. It's hurt more by big shocks than it benefits from stability. Like, getting hit by one large stone hurts way more than getting hit by the same weight in tiny pebbles. It's fragile to volatility.
Okay. And convex.
Convex is the smile. It benefits more from shocks and volatility than it's hurt by them. Think of a financial option. Your potential loss is capped, but your potential gain is unlimited. It loves randomness. That's anti-fragile.
And the grandmother analogy really highlights this, right? Or the danger of averages in nonlinear systems.
Perfect illustration. Grandma's fine at a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
But if she spends 1 hour freezing at 0 degrees and 1 hour baking at 140 degrees, the average temperature is 70. Looks fine on paper.
But in reality...
In reality, she's dead. Because her health response to temperature is nonlinear. Extremes matter hugely. You can't just average the inputs. You have to consider the function's response to the range of inputs. For fragile things, extreme events are disproportionately damaging, even if the average looks okay.
Which means our constant pursuit of optimization, efficiency, and sheer size can actually make things more fragile.
Very often, yes. Because optimization usually means reducing redundancy and buffers, making the system highly sensitive to deviations from the expected norm. Think about traffic again.
Right, the highway example.
Add a few cars, maybe no big deal. But push it closer to its maximum capacity, and suddenly each additional car has a massive nonlinear impact, dramatically slowing everyone down. The system becomes concave, fragile to small increases in load.
And we see this with efficient airports or train systems, too.
Absolutely. They operate at, say, 98% capacity to maximize throughput and minimize costs on an average day. Minimal redundancy. Looks super efficient.
Until
There's a small disruption. A bit of bad weather, a minor strike, 5% more passengers than expected. Suddenly, because there's no slack, no buffer, you get chaos. Massive delays, cancellations cascading through the whole network. They're optimized for the average, but incredibly fragile to any volatility.
size itself can also be a fragility, the elephant example.
Yeah, owning an elephant seems cool, maybe manageable day to day, but when a drought hits, its massive water needs suddenly make it incredibly vulnerable compared to, say, a cat. Size creates nonlinear dependencies and exposures.
And this applies to big corporations, too.
Definitely. As corporations get huge, they become disproportionately fragile to certain kinds of errors or shocks. A single rogue trader, a PR mistake, a supply chain hiccup. The impact can be magnified enormously by the sheer scale and interconnectedness.
Like the Kerviel case at Societe Generale.
Classic example from the source. This trader built up massive unauthorized positions. When the bank had to liquidate them quickly, a huge $70 billion fire sale, the very size of the sale moved the market against them, making the losses non-linearly larger. A squeeze caused by their own massive footprint.
And the irony.
The irony was, Kerviel's bosses had apparently dismissed the author's ideas about black swans and nonlinear risks just weeks before this blew up in their faces. They were trapped in linear thinking, completely blind to the convex nature of their potential losses.
This nonlinearity even shows up in project management, right? Bigger projects fail more spectacularly.
They do. Cost overruns and delays tend to increase nonlinearly with project size and complexity, especially for monolithic projects like bridges or tunnels, which can't easily be broken down into independent parts.
Unlike roads.
Right. A road is built in segments. A delay in one part doesn't necessarily stop everything. But a problem deep inside a tunnel project can halt the entire multi-billion-dollar enterprise. It's inherently more fragile because it's one integrated, complex piece.
So the planning fallacy, our tendency to underestimate time and cost, isn't just psychological optimism.
It's partly that, but the source argues it's also baked into the nonlinear structure of large projects. Uncertainty doesn't average out, it almost always adds delays and costs, often in unpredictable, cascading ways. More complexity means more potential failure points, more dependencies, more concavity to error.
But nonlinearity isn't always bad. In biology, variability can be crucial, right? Like lifting weights.
Exactly. Bone density loss is a major issue in aging. What counteracts it? Stress. Not just any stress, but intense stress. Lifting heavy weights, max lifts, not endless light reps, forces the body to overcompensate.
To build back stronger.
Yes. The intense, short bursts of stress stimulate bone cells, making bones denser, stronger. It's pure antifragility. The body anticipates future stress by building extra capacity beyond just repairing the immediate damage.
And the lungs example, variable airflow.
Also fascinating, our lungs naturally work with a degree of variability, noise, not perfectly smooth, constant airflow. And studies apparently showed that giving patients with lung issues variable air pressure, mimicking this natural pattern, was actually more effective than constant, steady pressure. Again, the system thrives on, or at least expects, a degree of randomness. This overcompensation, this redundancy, isn't just defensive, it's an investment in future strength and opportunity.
Okay, so we understand what antifragility is, why it matters, where it shows up, but how do we actually build it? How do we cultivate it in our own lives, in our systems?
The sources offer some really practical strategies. Two main ones stand out: the barbell strategy and via negativa or subtraction.
Let's start with the barbell. What's that about? It sounds like weightlifting again.
It borrows the image, yeah. But it's a broader strategy. It's about combining two extremes and avoiding the mushy middle. On one end of the barbell, you are hyper-conservative, super safe. You're building robustness against negative black swans, the nasty surprises.
Okay, extreme safety in one area.
And on the other end of the barbell, you are hyper-aggressive, taking lots of small speculative risks. You're maximizing your exposure to positive black swans, the happy accidents, the unexpected windfalls.
So safety plus speculation, no middle ground.
Exactly. Avoid the moderate risk category. The source argues that's often where hidden fragilities lie, where you think you're safe but you're exposed to big downside, or where your upside is capped without you realizing it. The barbell is about consciously separating these exposures. It's aggressiveness plus paranoia, as the author puts it.
Can you give a financial example?
Sure. Financially, a barbell might mean keeping, say, 80–90% of your assets in extremely safe things, like cash, maybe physical gold, short-term government bonds, things that won't disappear in a crash and might even benefit from chaos. That's your safety net, protecting you from ruin.
Okay, the paranoid part.
Right. Then, with the remaining 10–20%, you take highly speculative bets. Small investments in lots of different startups. Maybe buying lottery tickets or options contracts, things where your maximum loss is small and known, the amount you invested, but the potential upside is huge, potentially unlimited.
So you cap your downside but keep the upside wide open.
Precisely. You eliminate the risk of blowing up completely while still giving yourself a chance to benefit massively from randomness.
And this isn't just about money, right? It applies to careers.
Definitely. A career barbell could be having a very stable, maybe not super exciting, but secure job, the sinecure, like a tenured academic or a civil servant with good protections. That covers your bills and reduces stress. Then, in your free time, you pursue your real passion, maybe something risky like writing a novel, starting a side business, developing an invention. The safe job funds the speculative passion project.
Or maybe working at a safe, practical job for a few years first.
Yeah, build skills, save money, build that safe end of the barbell before taking the plunge into something entrepreneurial or artistic. like knowing you have that safety net to fall back on.
Even exercise.
The source suggests yes. Instead of endless moderate jogging, maybe focus on very intense, short bursts of maximal effort heavy lifting, sprints which provide potent anti-fragile stimulus, and combine that with the other extreme, long, leisurely, low-stress walks for recovery and general health. Avoid the middle ground of moderately taxing, time-consuming workouts.
Okay, so the barbell is about playing the extremes to manage risk and capture upside. What's the second strategy? Via negativa.
Via negativa, the path of subtraction. It's about recognizing that we often gain more wisdom, health, and resilience, not by adding things, but by removing things, focusing on what to avoid, what to eliminate.
How does that work with knowledge?
Epistemologically, it's based on the idea that we know much more reliably what is wrong than what is right. Think about science. Karl Popper's idea of falsification.
Right, you can't definitively prove a theory true, but you can prove it false.
Exactly. One counterexample, one black swan demolishes a universal claim, all swans are white. Millions of confirming examples don't offer the same certainty. So knowledge, especially in complex domains, often advances by subtracting falsehoods, by eliminating what doesn't work, rather than just piling up new, potentially flawed theories.
And in decision-making, less is more.
Often, yes. Simple heuristics, those fast and frugal rules of thumb, frequently outperform complex models in the real world, precisely because the real world is messy and uncertain. Complex models try to optimize based on assumptions that might be wrong, making them fragile. Simple rules are more robust because they don't pretend to know everything.
So via negativa can even help predict the future. Subtractive prophecy.
That's the idea. Instead of guessing the next big invention, focus on what's likely to disappear because it's fragile. This connects to the Lindy effect.
Ah, right. Things that have been around a long time are likely to stick around even longer.
Exactly. Non-perishable things like technologies, ideas, maybe even recipes. A book that survived 100 years is probably more likely to survive another 100 than a book published last year. Time acts as a filter, weeding out the fragile. So a subtractive prediction looks at what's new, complex, optimized, centralized, dependent on forecasts, and predicts that stuff is likely to break or fade away.
Like large, over-leveraged corporations, centralized nation-states, maybe certain academic theories.
Those are exactly the kinds of things the source identifies as fragile and likely candidates for subtraction by time and volatility. This perspective helps you filter the noise, ignore the hype around the latest fragile trends, and focus on things with proven endurance.
And this applies powerfully to health and lifestyle too, doesn't it?
Hugely. Via negativa in health means, first, be incredibly skeptical of interventions. Only use medicine when the benefits are massive and undeniable, like life-saving surgery or treating a severe infection. Avoid elective procedures or drugs for minor issues where the potential iatrogenics might outweigh the benefits.
It also means removing things that make us fragile.
Yes. Consciously reject the comforts that deprive our bodies of necessary beneficial stressors. Things like maybe using less sunscreen to allow natural vitamin D production and skin adaptation, within reason, of course. Maybe less constant air conditioning, letting your body learn to handle temperature variations. Definitely cutting out sugary drinks that wreak havoc on metabolism. Avoiding overly smooth, uniform surfaces, letting your feet and body experience varied textures. Saying no to complicated pills for every little ache.
So true wealth isn't just adding more stuff.
According to the source, true wealth is largely subtractive. It's the absence of things. Absence of envy, absence of chronic disease, absence of debt slavery. It's having a good appetite, muscle tone from real activity, natural energy, the ability to laugh freely, not having endless meetings, enjoying simple pleasures and periodic surprises. These are often achieved by removing the things that block them.
Even things like intermittent fasting fit this model.
Perfectly. Temporarily depriving the body of food isn't just about calorie restriction. It triggers beneficial stress responses, cellular cleanup processes, autophagy, potentially upregulating genes linked to longevity. It's gaining health through subtraction, through planned deprivation.
And our information diet. Too much data is toxic.
Absolutely. Via negativa for information means drastically cutting down. More frequent data, like checking news or stocks constantly, just increases your exposure to noise relative to signal. Hourly stock data. The source claims it's 99.5% noise. You make worse decisions.
So the solution is?
Look less often. Focus only on very large changes or long-term trends. Let the real signal emerge from the noise. Be ruthless about subtracting information sources that are mostly noise, opinion, or designed to provoke anxiety.
And the guiding principle here is guilty until proven innocent. but applied differently.
Yes, flipped from the legal sense. What Mother Nature does, natural foods, natural movement, the way complex systems evolve over time should be considered rigorous, the default, until proven harmful. The burden of proof is on showing it's bad. Conversely, what humans invent and intervene with new drugs, trans fats, complex financial derivatives, top-down social engineering should be considered flawed and potentially harmful until proven otherwise. The burden of proof is on the intervention to demonstrate its benefits robustly without causing hidden fragilities. It's a call for deep skepticism towards novelty and interventionism.
This naturally leads to a critique of how we think about knowledge itself and where innovation actually comes from.
Yeah.
You mentioned the lecturing birds how to fly effect.
Yeah, it's this pervasive illusion that progress comes primarily from academic knowledge, from theory, from top-down design. We imagine the Wright brothers reading aerodynamic textbooks and then building a plane.
But the reality is often different.
Often the reverse. Technology and real-world innovation frequently bubble up from practitioners, tinkerers, craftsmen, engineers through trial and error, experimentation, taking risks. They figure out what works first. Then the academics come along later, explain why it works, write the history, and maybe claim the credit.
Like the wheeled food case example.
Exactly. It seems incredibly obvious now, right? Wheels on luggage. But it took ages to appear. Why? Maybe because the smart people, the engineers and designers, were focused on complex, important problems like space travel, not simple, practical things. The knowledge wasn't in a theory, it was embedded in the everyday problem of lugging heavy bags.
Or the steam engine.
The basic principle was known anciently just as a toy, but it only became a world-changing technology during the Industrial Revolution when mechanics and engineers tinkered with it, iterated, made it work reliably through hands-on experimentation, not primarily through theoretical breakthroughs in thermodynamics, which came out later.
It highlights that simplicity is actually really hard.
It is. As Steve Jobs said, simple can be harder than complex. You have to really understand something deeply to strip it down to its essence, to make it elegantly simple. That often comes from practical experience, not just abstract thought.
So this leads to a critique of formal education and the role of experts.
It does. The source points to a growing translational gap. The time lag between a formal scientific discovery and its useful practical application seems to be getting longer, not shorter, possibly because of academic noise, incentives to publish minor findings rather than major breakthroughs, and specialization.
And the idea that education leads to wealth.
The source argues it's often the other way around. Wealth allows for more education. Formal schooling is often more of a consequence or a marker of existing socioeconomic status, an epiphenomenon, rather than the primary engine of wealth creation itself. Practical skills, risk-taking, street smarts often play a bigger role, especially in entrepreneurship.
Which creates this divide between doers and talkers.
Right. Entrepreneurs, artisans, tinkerers, they're selected by the real world based on whether they can do things, whether their creations work and survive. Their insights are often tacit, hard to put into words. Bureaucrats, academics, consultants, they're often selected based on how well they talk, how convincingly they present ideas, their credentials, the halo effect. There's often no immediate objective test of whether their talk actually translates into useful outcomes.
This sounds like the green lumber fallacy.
Exactly. The trader who made a fortune trading green lumber without knowing it was freshly cut wood, he just knew it wasn't dried or brown. He didn't need the theoretical knowledge of forestry. He needed the practical knowledge of how that specific commodity behaved in the market. Mistaking the source of useful knowledge is easy.
Like thinking the mathematicians built the cathedrals.
Right. Medieval builders used heuristics, rules of thumb passed down and refined through generations of practice. They built incredible structures without advanced calculus or stress diagrams. The Romans built aqueducts that still stand using practical geometry and experience. Sometimes, over-applying formal mathematics, especially based on flawed models of reality, can lead to over-optimization and actually increase fragility. The old, empirically tested ways can be more robust.
So much of progress seems to come from luck, serendipity.
A surprising amount, yes. Many crucial medical discoveries, penicillin is the classic case, were accidental. Fleming wasn't looking for an antibiotic. He noticed mold-killing bacteria in a contaminated petri dish. It was an accident, but he was prepared to see its significance.
And this has implications for how we fund research.
The source argues strongly for funding non-teleological tinkering, supporting basic research, allowing scientists and inventors to follow their curiosity, creating environments where happy accidents can happen. Huge breakthroughs like the internet or GPS often emerged as unintended side effects of research aimed at something else entirely. Trying to tightly control research towards specific, predetermined goals might actually stifle the biggest discoveries, which often come from unexpected directions.
This really forces us to question our core assumptions about knowledge. It's not just about true or false.
Right. It's often more about sucker or non-sucker, as the source's character Fat Tony would say. In the real world, your exposure to the consequences of an idea, the potential payoff or loss, is often far more important than whether the idea is perfectly theoretically true. An idea that's slightly wrong but harmless or beneficial in practice can be better than one that's theoretically elegant but leads to ruin if applied.
So it's about practical wisdom over theoretical purity.
In many domains, yes. It echoes Nietzsche's understanding of creation through destruction, or Renan's point about logic missing the nuances where truth often lies. Formal logic is clean, but reality is messy.
Like Empedocles' dog knowing exactly which cool tile to lie on.
Perfect image. The dog doesn't analyze thermal conductivity, it just knows through direct experience. Practice, trial and error, real-world feedback. These reveal secrets that pure analysis or abstract opinion often miss entirely. It's a call to respect that embodied, practical, empirically tested knowledge.
Okay, this brings us to what feels like the most critical piece, the ethics. The ethics of fragility, or as the source frames it, skin in the game.
Yes, this is presented as the central ethical problem of modernity.
And the problem is?
The transfer of fragility. It's when people manage to gain anti-fragility for themselves, they get the upside, the benefits, the bonuses, by sticking others with the downside, the risks, the costs. This asymmetry, where one party benefits from volatility while another suffers from it, is often hidden by complexity, by layers of bureaucracy and intermediation.
And this creates these modern inverse heroes.
Exactly. People in positions of influence, certain bureaucrats, bankers, academics, pundits who make decisions, give advice, promote policies, but have no personal exposure to the consequences if they're wrong. They get the upside of being right, or appearing right, but suffer no penalty for being disastrously wrong. They transfer the fragility away from themselves.
So the core ethical rule becomes,
Thou shalt not have anti-fragility at the expense of the fragility of others. Simple, but profound. It's not a new idea.
the ancients understood this, Hammurabi's code.
Right. If a builder built a house that collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son was killed. It sounds brutal to us, but the logic was about alignment. It ensured the builder had the ultimate skin in the game, making them extremely motivated to build safely. It wasn't just post hoc punishment, it was a powerful upfront incentive system.
And other historical examples. Bankers in Catalonia.
The source mentions tales of bankers being executed in front of their banks if they failed. Again, direct personal accountability. Even the mafia, in its own way, understands skin in the game for ensuring loyalty and performance. When consequences are personal and severe, behavior changes dramatically.
Compared to today, where someone can give terrible financial advice or promote a disastrous policy and face basically nothing. The talker's free option.
That's the term. They have optionality, they benefit if their prediction or advice turns out right, but they lose nothing or very little if it turns out wrong. Think of pundits who strongly advocated for, say, the Iraq War.
Like Thomas Friedman, mentioned in the sources.
Right. Despite being profoundly wrong, with devastating real-world consequences for millions, his career continued, his influence remained. He had no skin in the game. The fragility was borne entirely by others. This creates a terrible incentive structure where irresponsible advice carries no personal cost.
And the Stiglitz syndrome. High intelligence, but no skin in the game.
It refers to individuals with brilliant analytical minds who seem blind to real-world fragility, perhaps because they operate purely in the realm of theory. They can offer contradictory advice, cherry-pick past statements to claim foresight after the fact, and advocate policies that fail, all without suffering personal consequences. Academia, the source argues, can sometimes perpetuate this because institutions need something to teach, even if it's flawed, and there's little penalty for academics being wrong in ways that don't directly affect their careers.
So why is skin in the game so fundamentally important?
Because it aligns actions with consequences. It forces people making decisions or giving advice to truly consider the potential downsides, because those downsides could affect them. It filters out noise and incompetence. It separates the genuine expert who backs their claims with exposure from the mere talker.
The pilot on board heuristic captures this perfectly.
Doesn't it? You trust the pilot because their life is on the line just like yours. Their interests are perfectly aligned with yours through shared risk. That's the power of skin in the game.
And it helps us evaluate whose opinions to trust.
It's a great filter. Give more weight to opinions when they seem to go against speakers' narrow self-interest. If a CEO argues for higher corporate taxes, or a doctor advocates a simple lifestyle change over an expensive procedure they could profit from, that opinion carries more weight because they have skin in the game against their own apparent benefit. It signals authenticity.
This lack of skin in the game seems amplified by collective action, too. The tyranny of the collective.
Yes, people in committees, bureaucracies, large organizations often make decisions they wouldn't make individually. Responsibility gets diffused, groupthink takes over. Blame can be spread around if things go wrong. This allows for larger, sillier, more fragile mistakes to be made because no single individual feels the direct heat.
Like the difference between a local artisan and a giant corporation.
The source contrasts them starkly. An artisan baker selling bread directly to laborers has immediate skin in the game. If the bread is bad, customers stop coming, their reputation suffers instantly. Large corporations selling mass-produced junk food or complex financial products, they're insulated by layers of marketing, legal teams, lobbying power. They can create massive negative externalities, health problems, financial crises, and push the costs onto society, delaying their own collapse, often for decades. They've managed to escape skin in the game, at least temporarily.
Which leads to that final point. Never trust a man who is not free. What does that mean in this context?
It means true freedom isn't just political, it's intellectual and ethical independence. It's owning your own opinions, your own actions, and crucially, your own consequences. Not being bound by the need to please an employer, an institution, a political party, or the crowd. Someone who is free, like Aristotle's ideal citizen or the street-smart fat Tony, can weigh options based on reality and their own judgment because they bear the results. They have self-ownership, which is the ultimate form of skin in the game.
Wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground, really diving deep into this idea of anti-fragility. It's definitely far more than just being tough or resilient.
It really is. It's about understanding how systems, from our own bodies to economies to ideas themselves, can actually use disorder, stress, randomness, not just to survive, but to fundamentally improve and grow stronger.
And we've seen how our modern world, with its focus on prediction, control, optimization, often inadvertently does the opposite. It makes things more fragile by suppressing the very volatility that could lead to strength.
Right. And the ethical core of it all comes down to skin in the game, the crucial need for accountability, for aligning decisions with consequences, if we want to build systems that are robust, fair, and ultimately anti-fragile.
So listening to all this, the big question becomes, what does this mean for you, the listener? In this complex world full of hidden risks and well-intentioned but sometimes harmful interventions, how can you actively cultivate anti-fragility in your own life?
And how can you get better at spotting the hidden fragilities all around you, maybe in your job, your investments, your health habits, even in the institutions you rely on?
Think about it. What things in your life right now are actually benefiting from stressors or challenges you might normally try to avoid? Where is discomfort actually making you stronger or smarter?
And perhaps even more powerfully, using that idea of via negativa. What could you subtract from your life? What unnecessary comforts, maybe draining routines, maybe toxic information sources, or even just fragile expectations? What could you remove to make yourself less vulnerable and more open to benefiting from the inevitable chaos of life?
It's about learning not just to endure disorder, but to potentially thrive on it.
Keep exploring, keep questioning assumptions, and maybe start to embrace the wisdom that comes not just from control, but from navigating and even welcoming a healthy dose of well-chosen chaos.